With the Louisville Regional Championships just around the corner, I've had a lot of people asking me what I think are the best decks in the current format. So in today's video, I'm going to be going over my top 10 decks in the Stellar Crown metagame. Starting off our list at number 10, we have Miraidon EX. Now, with the release of Stellar Crown, this deck got a significant buff with the Area 0 underdepths, allowing Raikou to do up to 340 damage. That's if your opponent also has 8 bench Pokemon, but more realistically, if they have 5, it allows you to knock out V-Star Pokemon, specifically Regidrago V-Star, which is very nice. However, all the problems that plagued this deck before Stellar Crown still remain, with Raging Bolt and Charizard being very popular archetypes. You don't beat either of them. Raging Bolt is simply a better version of your deck. They attack harder and faster with the same 2 prize Pokemon that you're using, making it a very difficult matchup to overcome. In a different way, the Charizard matchup is very bad because their Pokemon just have massive HP. As long as your Charizard opponent doesn't bench 8, which I highly doubt they will ever do, you can't actually deal with a Charizard EX very well, and one Charizard often takes 4 prizes, making it very difficult to win the game. Now, some strengths for the deck. The Lugia matchup, of course, very favorable. I was about to say the Palkia matchup is favorable. However, that's not even true because of Greninja EX hitting you for that fighting weakness. So, with all those things considered, Miraidon here coming in at number 10. If you love Miraidon, you really want to spin the wheel with some electric generators, here's the list that I would use. Glenn Bowens' top 8 list from the Dortmund Regional Championships. Biggest thing to call out here is the Secret Box. I like this card a lot, as on turn 1, you can Arven for the Secret Box and a Rescue Board. Secret Box, get an electric generator, a Forest Sealstone, and the Area 0 Underdepths. And then from there, you can pop off, get whatever you need, and hopefully get off that turn 1 attack. Moving into number 9, sad to see Gardevoir all the way down here on the list, but this deck has a lot of issues. Now with the release of Stellar Crown and Briar, Dusknoir decks have seen a significant uptick in play, which causes a lot of problems. For example, if you use TM Evolution to put 2 Kirlias in play on the second turn of the game, your opponent can just Dusknoir one of them and then knock out the other, and you're in a really rough spot. So, with that being said, I would heavily recommend a rare candy build of Gardevoir if you're going to be playing this deck in order to deal with these Dusknoir decks. Specifically, decks like Dusknoir Palkia are really hard to deal with. Additionally, this deck has other problems, right? You gotta play an Enhanced Hammer or a Temple of Sinnoh if you want to beat Lugia. You gotta play TM Devo if you want to beat Charizard. And you probably gotta be playing Manaphy if you want to beat Regidrago. Really, just a lot of cards you need to be fitting into the deck. Additionally, you want to have Monkey Dories and Dark Energies. Those are also good in the Charizard matchup, but you got to make some cuts, so you can't beat all of these decks. Now, some strengths for Gardevoir. The Raging Bolt matchup still very favorable. The Lugia matchup, like I said, if you play Enhanced Hammer, is strong. And the number 1 reason to play Gardevoir is nostalgia. If you played this deck while Shining Arcana, Gardevoir with standard legal, then you know what I'm talking about. Where we're not there, guys. The deck is not as good as it used to be. So if you're still reminiscing about those Shining Arcana days, then here's the Gardevoir list that I would be playing in this current format. Tenry Chow's Baltimore Regional Champion list with 1 edit. Just cut the Pokemon League HQ for a Temple of Sinnoh. I think Lugia has proven itself to be a strong archetype in Stellar Crown, so I would show some respect to Lugia with that Temple of Sinnoh for the Legacy energy specifically. Otherwise, the Secret Box, something to call out. I think that card brings a much needed speed to this deck that it otherwise lacks. Very hard to get a Drifloon attack on turn 2 or even turn 3 sometimes without the Secret Box and this kind of like Pheasantipity rare candy build. So I think that this build is much better at keeping up in today's fast-paced metagame, and I would really favor a build like this over something with multiple TM evolutions. Up next, we got Raging Bolt at number 8. Now, a lot of people love this deck, and for good reason. This deck is incredibly powerful, incredibly consistent, and You win a lot of games. Just when your opponent doesn't set up, you can really capitalize. However, this deck is very linear, right? You do one thing, you use Bellowing Thunder. You don't have the ability to take multi-prize turns unless you're knocking out multi-prize Pokemon, and you don't really have any defensive capabilities. Cards like Iono, not really in your deck. Bravery Charm is kind of the only thing you really have to protect your Pokemon. Otherwise, the Charizard matchup is fairly bad, simply because they'll let you knock out a one prize Pokemon on the first turn of the game and then run you over with large Charizard EXs. Additionally, Radiant Charizard puts in a lot of work, just not really a Pokemon you ever want to knock out. With this deck, always want to be knocking out two prize Pokemon, and sometimes Charizard can prevent you by doing that by just having a board with a Radiant Charizard and then a bunch of weak one prize Pokemon, and you can't actually take your final two. Trapagos matchup also not very favorable for a similar reason. On the first turn of the game, if the Trapagos player just doesn't bench a Terapagos, puts down a bunch of Hoot Hoots and Pidgey and Fanrotom, whatever, you're going to be able to take one prize, but then you're going to be behind. The Terapagos player is going to be able to take two on every turn of the game, and you're not really going to be in a good spot. Now, a lot of strength for the deck. The Dragapult matchup, one that I'll call out. Dragapult just can't really deal with their Dragapult EX being knocked out every turn of the game. So if you play against that matchup, just attack their energies, attack their Dragapult EX, and you'll be good to go. Similarly, Regidrago V-Star, you're going to be able to attack first. They have to evolve, so you just attack first, take two prizes, and you're going to be very, very far ahead. So here's a look at my Raging Bolt list. Briar, really only the interesting card in the deck. I'm not even entirely convinced that this card is good. I think at the end of the game, sometimes you're able to pull it off and it feels really strong, right? You got Pokegears and Pokestops in order to kind of find it at the end of the game. But without energy switches, sometimes it's awkward to have energies ready on your Teal Mask Ogerpon, right? If you want to use Briar next turn, you're going to need an energy on Teal Mask Ogerpon. And not only that, you're probably going to need an energy on two different Teal Mask Ogerpons, or else your opponent can just knock one of them out, and you can't actually use Briar. Now, with that being said, I think this card does help in the Charizard matchup. Sometimes being able to take three prizes on a Charizard EX can be game changing. So this is definitely a card I would want to experiment with. Otherwise, the Bravery Charms, one other thing to talk about. I think the card is really good. Protects your Raging Bolts from Lost Impact from Regidrago. Protects your Pokemon from Terapagos, right? Like if you put Bravery Charm on Ogerpon, it doesn't die. So I really do value these Bravery Charms, just making it a little more difficult for your opponent to take those knockouts. Before I get into our number 7 deck, I wanted to let you guys know about endgame sleeves. I can't tell you how many times I opened up a pack of Ultra Pros or Dragon Shields just for the pack to be completely unusable. Whether they're different colors, different heights, or had the bottoms pre-broken, I have no idea how the quality control has gotten so poor. I'm very excited to start using a brand of sleeves that I can actually rely on. If you're interested in using some quality sleeves, you can head on over to endgametcg.ca and pick up some of these amazing pastel colors for yourself. You can also use code ROWAN for 10% off, and the link will be in the description down below. Coming in at number 7, an icon of the format, we got Pidgeot Charizard. This deck has been around in the metagame for a long time and has always been pretty strong. Now, in the current format, I think there are some better options out there, but it does have some strengths, right? The Raging Bolt matchup. Raging Bolt, one of the most popular decks in the game, and you kind of destroy Raging Bolt. Terapagos, also a fairly strong matchup. As long as you don't get run over at the start of the game, you can make some big Charizards, and it's going to be hard for Terapagos to deal with those. And I put consistency with a question mark because I think this deck has actually lost a lot of the consistency it used to have. Right now we're playing tech cards like Thornton and Briar, and I think this deck just clunks up a little too often for me. Some other weaknesses, Dragapult, Regidrago, of course, getting double knocked out on the first or second turn of the game. Really bad, especially getting your Pidgeys knocked out. Then you really don't have a draw engine for the rest of the game, so Dragapult EX, a large problem for the deck. And also Palkia Dusknoir, a kind of new threat for the deck to face, right? Especially if you're not playing Manaphy, Radiant Greninja or Greninja EX are going to rip you apart. Here's a look at a Charizard deck list. This list is from Smart TCG. They placed in the top 128, I think, at the Dortmund Regionals, but I really like their list. I think it has everything you need in it and no fluff. The Briar and the Thornton, really strong cards, kind of inconsistent, but I think the power level is necessary. The ability to Thornton into Charmander after a Palkia deck or a Terapagos deck wipes your board of Charmanders is pretty mandatory. Similarly, Briar is ridiculously powerful if you have to initiate with a one prize knockout. You can take a one prizer at the start and then pick up 3 later on in the game and still win in 3 attacks. Otherwise, Unfair Stamp as the ace-spec of choice. I think this card is really strong, mostly just for consistency reasons, right? Just being able to Arven for shuffle draw 5 is very, very strong. Coming in at number 6, we've got Dragapult Dusknoir. Now, when I'm talking about this deck, I'm talking about the list that won the Dortmund Regionals. I don't like the version with Pidgeot EX. I think it's just too slow. Now, strengths for the deck is going to be the Charizard and Terapagos matchups. Similar to Charizard, you got to be careful about your Dreepies at the start of the game, but if you're able to establish multiple Dragapult EX, you should be pretty solid against Terapagos. And of course, as we talked about with Charizard, just take some multi-knockouts, get rid of the Pidgey, and you're going to be in a good spot. Now for weaknesses, Regidrago, of course, pretty much the worst matchup for this deck, I think. Actually, Raging Bolt's probably even worse, but Regidrago, able to copy Phantom Dive as well. Knock out your Dreepies, use something like a Halucha maybe, and then knock out your Dreepy. Additionally, if you're not playing Manaphy, they can just wipe your board with Kyurem, which is a major issue. Raging Bolt, on the other hand, not so good at wiping your board of Dreepy, but very good at clearing Dragapult EX from play, right? You're going to put 2 energies on it, and it's going to immediately get knocked out, so that's a large issue for this deck. Here's the list from Ryuki Okada that won the Dortmund Regional Championships. One change, I believe I cut the second Rotom for the 4th Nest Ball, and I think that's all. I really like the way this deck is built. The Tatsugiri, the Dusknoir brings a unique aspect to this deck. Just being able to make some stronger plays, really clear your opponent's board of basics or threatening Pokemon, energy cards, stuff like that. I think it allows you to make some game-winning plays. Otherwise, the Sparkling Crystal from Stellar Crown, of course, the newest addition, and what's really allowing this deck to catapult up the tier list. Before, I probably would have had this deck at like number 10 or maybe not even on the list, but Sparkling Crystal really makes it easy to attack on the 2nd or 3rd turn of the game. Last call out is the Temple of Sinnoh as the stadium of choice, really just giving some respect to Lugia, which I think is one of the premier archetypes of the format. Moving into the top of the tier list, we got Iron Thorns here coming in at number 5. Probably my most controversial placement of the tier list. I think this deck is actually pretty underrated. With a very strong matchup into Charizard, Regidrago, and Lugia, there are a lot of decks that your opponent can just flip over one Pokemon and you immediately know that you're gonna win the game. Some weaknesses for the deck, random decks, of course, right? If you load into an online tournament or go to a regional championships or your League Cup, wherever you're going, and your opponent at the first round is playing a deck like Cloth, well, you're just going to get wrecked. A bunch of other random decks with a lot of energy cards that don't rely heavily on rule box Pokemon, probably going to give you a rough time as you're only going to be doing 140 damage a turn. Additional weaknesses include the deck being very linear. Even these free matchups, like Charizard and Regidrago, are sometimes losable if your opponent knows what they're doing and is able to use things like Motivate to put energies in play. Or if your Charizard opponent is able to set up a Charizard on the bench, bring it up and just start sweeping. One canceling Cologne, of course, as well in Charizard can just take you out. So a lot of stupid things that can kind of ruin this deck. But overall, I think if people aren't going to be respecting this archetype, it is very, very strong. Here's an Iron Thorns list, similar to the one that I was testing for the Pokemon World Championships in August. The only new addition being Enhanced Hammer. Just a little bit of help for the Terapagos matchup. Removing those energy cards is very strong, right? If they only play maybe one Chloris's Tenacity, or maybe they don't even play Chloris's Tenacity. they can often struggle to find their energy cards without the use of Pidgeot EX's Quick Search. So Enhanced Hammer in the deck, you could even play more of them if you're very concerned with the Terapagos matchup. Otherwise, bunch of consistency, bunch of disruption, the Pokemon catchers, the crushing hammers, pretty standard stuff. I would just make sure not to play any additional basics in your Iron Thorns deck. You need to start with Iron Thorns EX, or else a lot of your good matchups become kind of iffy. On to number 4, we've got Lugia V-Star. This card has been around for a long time, and the deck has taken many different forms. Now, I haven't played a ton of Lugia, but I'm going to have to say that Rule Ready's Lugia V-Star list is the way to go. The guy's on an absolute tear, so if you're a Lugia enjoyer, definitely check out Rule's YouTube channel. I'm sure he's got a video or two up on this deck. Strengths for the deck, Raging Bolt, pretty solid matchup. As long as you're able to set up, you can swing the prize trade back in your favor using either Legacy Energy or Cincino. Regidrago, also a fairly strong matchup. Again, Legacy Energy puts in work, especially if they're not playing Temple of Sinnoh. You can really run over them. With a Lugia V-Star, with a V-Guard Energy and a Mist, they really have no way of dealing with that. Additionally, the Dragapult matchup seems pretty solid to me. One Weirdeer is going to go ahead and probably wipe out 4 prizes worth of Dragapults, so I think that matchup's very strong as well. For weaknesses, I got consistency, as I'm sure all the Lugia enjoyers out there know. You don't always get 2 Archeops in the discard pile and Summoning Star them out on turn 2. When you do, you have very few bad matchups, but when you don't, you can lose to just about any deck in the game. And then Miraidon and Iron Thorns are going to be your biggest bad matchups. Even if you get 2 chops out on turn 2, you can definitely still lose to these matchups. Well, against Thorns, you're never getting out chops, so that's going to be a large issue. Here's a deck list, Rule Ready's list from Dortmund and from Worlds, and also from Baltimore. This guy's on a complete tear. The Raikou V, I think maybe the most interesting card to call out in the deck. I think this card's really good. Helps you kill Palkia Vs, Palkia V-Stars, Pidgeot EX, another Pokemon that's weak to Lightning, and a lot of top decks right now have Pidgeot EX, so I think this Raikou puts in a lot of work. Of course, Lugia V-Star Mirror Match, also going to put in some work, just being able to KO Lugia V-Stars. Another card that I'm going to call out here is Weirdeer V. I've seen some Lugia decks that don't play this card. I think that's a big blunder. Being able to do uncapped damage out of nowhere is very, very important, as oftentimes if you're not playing this card and you only have 1 Minccino in play and it gets knocked out, then you can't deal with even something like a Regidrago V-Star or a Charizard EX, of course, is the bigger one. Getting into the top 3, this is the podium. We've got Palkia Dusknoir. Now, I think this deck is very, very overlooked and very powerful. Greninja EX, I made a little tweet about it. Kind of joking, kind of not. Greninja EX is actually a very powerful card. The Shinobi Blade attack and Mirage Barrage, both very usable. The most powerful thing to do with this Palkia deck is Star Portal onto Froakie on the second turn of the game, Rare Candy into Greninja, attach a 4th energy card, and use Mirage Barrage. It's going to leave you with 2 energy cards, and then next turn you can attach and Mirage Barrage again. Now this puts a lot of pressure on decks like Charizard and Dragapult and Terapagos as well. Any deck that's trying to use basic Pokemon and evolve is going to be put in rough shape when you get to go first. Now, the biggest weakness for this deck is the Raging Bolt matchup, as when your opponent knocks out a 2-prizer at the start of the game with Raging Bolt, there's really not much that can be done. Additionally, you have to put down 2-prize Pokemon. This isn't like Charizard or Terapagos, where you can get away with not benching your Palkia Vs. You need to evolve into Palkia V-Star, which means that you're going to have some 2-prize Pokemon on the bench, and that's going to be a very rough matchup. Here's a look at the list. Credit goes to Grafton Roll from the Baltimore Regional Championships. I think I made one change. I cut the Squawkabilly EX for the 4th Pokestop. I'm pretty convinced Pokestop is just the best card in this deck. With Night Stretcher, you like milling Pokemon, you like finding your rare candies, your trekking shoes, your Pokemon search cards. and really getting recurring value from this card is really what makes this deck so strong. Additionally, the Greninja EX, already talked about it, but there he is. Very, very strong card. And then you've got the Dusknoir, lets you KO your opponent's Manaphy, if they're even playing it. A lot of decks nowadays have cut Manaphy, which means you don't even need a Dusknoir to completely wipe their board on the second turn of the game. Number 2, we've got Regidrago V-Star. This deck's been strong for a while, and as you can see, the strengths column is completely filled up with good matchups. Charizard, Gardevoir, Dragapult, and I put Dusknoir decks there as well. They're not all necessarily favorable matchups, but Dusknoir decks don't get a lot of value against you. 2 Dusknoirs does not knock out a Regidrago V-Star. You have very few one-prize Pokemon for Dusknoir to target down, and you can just choose to not bench them. One of the most powerful things these Dusknoir decks can do, whether it's Charizard or Terapagos, is use a Dusknoir, knock out a one-prize Pokemon, and then use Briar and KO a 2-prize Pokemon for 3, essentially taking a 4-prize turn. So against these Dusknoir decks, you're really going to want to avoid putting down one-prize Pokemon. Cards like Cleffa, Hawlucha can oftentimes be a mistake to put onto the board. Now for weaknesses, Iron Thorns, of course, going to be a bad matchup. If you play Canceling Clone and Goodra, you get a little more of a chance, but if you're not playing those cards, it's going to be a super, super rough time. Then also Turbo decks like Miraidon and Raging Bolt, going to give you a hard time. You're going to have to rely on your one-prize Pokemon, especially Radiant Charizard, in order to kind of skew that 2-prize card race that those Turbo decks are going for. All that being said, here's the list. You'll notice there is no Goodra. I'm rocking 2 Dragapult EX just because there are so many matchups nowadays where Dragapult is crucial. Against Charizard, you need this card. Against Terapagos, you need it. And against any other Dusknoir deck, right, like Dragapult Dusknoir, Palkia Dusknoir, against all these decks, Dragapult is really, really strong. Some other things you'll notice, I'm still rocking the Iron Bundle and the Hawlucha. I think having a bunch of one-prize Pokemon is very helpful against those Turbo decks. Just by starting Hawlucha or Iron Bundle or Cleffa or Radzard, you really give your Turbo opponent the hardest turn possible, right? Then they have to hit a Pokemon Catcher Heads or a Prime Catcher to take 2 prizes on turn 1, in addition to Sadas and whatever other energy they need to get that knockout. Stadium of Choice, Temple of Sinnoh, a little bit of a theme of this tier list. If you're playing a deck that it makes sense to have a Temple of Sinnoh, I would highly recommend it. I think Lugia is very strong into the current meta, so I'm rocking the Temple of Sinnoh here. Also, I don't particularly think Jamming Tower is necessary, even against Raging Bolt and the Bravery Charms. I don't think you need it at all. Moving into the number 1 deck on my tier list, probably not a surprise for anyone who's been paying attention to my videos, but we've got Terapagos Dusknoir. Now, the number 1 strength of this deck is the Raging Bolt matchup, which I consider to be pretty much unlosable, especially when you don't start Terapagos. I think it's almost impossible to lose. Additionally, the Lugia matchup, very good when you go first. One of the few decks in the format that I think is can beat a Lugia that gets 2 Archeops out on turn 2 and like a perfect board. I think you're still going to be favored there. And of course, I just put going first because I think when you go first with this deck, it's pretty hard to lose to just about anything. So if you win almost all the games you go first, right? You already have about a 50% win rate. Then you win, I don't know, some of the games you go second. Let's say you win like half the games you go second, maybe, or maybe last like 1/3. You're still going to have like a 60% win rate overall, which is pretty incredible. For weaknesses, I put turn 1 Judge Iono. I played at a League Cup the other day, and I got hit by a turn 1 Judge, and it was pretty vicious. This deck does not have a ton of draw support in it, so if you're able to play a Judge or an Iono after they use Fan Rotom to search out their Noctowl on turn 1, you're going to get a lot of value there. And then also Charizard, probably one of the only matchups that I consider fairly losable when you go first, right? Charizard EX, really hard to deal with, especially if they don't have any Pokemon like Rotom, Pheasantipede, Lumineon. You're really going to need to kill those Pokemon in order to stay in the prize trade. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tier list. I hope it gave you a good sense of what's viable. At the end of the day, any of the top 10 decks on this tier list are going to be solid choices. So if I rated your deck lowly, don't take it to heart. Play it anyways, especially if you're confident in your ability to play the deck. It's probably going to be a good choice for you. Other than that, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video, leave a comment down below, let me know which one of these decks is your favorite deck, and I'll see you guys in the next one.